my son David screamed. "You're nothing but worthless trash, old man," throwing my suitcase into the Manhattan blizzard. "Don't ever come back here, you pathetic fool." The penthouse door slammed behind me as I stood shivering in the storm, watching my own son dispose of me like garbage. At 76, I felt more abandoned than ever, till I pulled out my phone and made one call that would change everything. You see, David had no idea who he'd just betrayed. I'm William Stone, and I own half of Wall Street. My son just declared war on a $500 million empire. What happened next destroyed his world completely. Before we dive into how William destroyed David's world, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Tell me your location and what the weather's like outside your window. Let's see how far this story reaches across the globe before we watch David's empire crumble. The penthouse door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed through the empty Manhattan street. The sound cut through the howling blizzard like a death sentence. I stood there on the sidewalk, my suitcase soaking in the snow, trying to process what had just happened. "You're nothing but worthless trash, old man." David's words still rang in my ears, each syllable a dagger to my heart. My own son, the boy I'd raised, sacrificed everything for, worked 2 jobs to put through college. The same child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, promising he'd always take care of me when I got old. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, 76 years old, standing in a storm that made those childhood thunderstorms look like gentle rain. But this wasn't just weather battering me. It was betrayal in its purest, most brutal form. "I should have put you in a nursing home years ago," David had screamed, his face twisted with disgust as he grabbed my belongings. "You're nothing but a burden, a pathetic old fool who can't take a hint." Amanda stood behind him, her arms crossed, nodding in agreement. No remorse, no hesitation. They'd planned this. The legal documents I'd glimpsed on their kitchen table, the hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room, it all made sense now. They wanted me gone, and they wanted it to look like I'd lost my mind. The sleet cut into my face like tiny knives, but nothing hurt worse than the memory of David's eyes, cold, empty, looking at me like I was garbage to be disposed of. Where was the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street? Where was the young man who'd cried at his mother's funeral, clinging to me for comfort? I picked up my soaked suitcase, its weight somehow heavier now that it contained everything I had left in this world. My slippers were already soaked through, each step sending icy water between my toes. The street was empty. No neighbors peered through their windows. No one cared about an old man being cast out into the storm. But David had made one crucial mistake. He thought he knew who I was. He thought William Stone was just some helpless old man living off his son's charity. He had no idea that the worthless trash he'd just thrown into a blizzard owned half of Wall Street. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. Catherine had warned me about this day. My sister had begged me for years to stop the charade, to stop testing David's love by pretending to be poor. "This will end badly, William," she'd said just last month. "Show him the truth before it's too late." Too late. The words echoed in my mind as I dialed her number. It was 2 a.m., but I knew Catherine would answer. She always did. "William?" Her voice was sharp with concern. "Where are you?" "Central Park," I said, my voice barely audible over the wind. "Under the bridge near 72nd Street. David." He threw me out. The silence on the other end lasted only a heartbeat. Then Catherine's voice came back, cold as the storm around me but filled with deadly purpose. "I'm coming to get you right now." "And William?" Her tone made my blood run cold despite the freezing temperature. "No more games. Tomorrow, we show David exactly who he just threw away." As I waited in the storm, watching my breath form clouds in the frigid air, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not the helpless desperation of an abandoned father, but the quiet, dangerous calm of a man who'd finally stopped pretending to be weak. David was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. 30 minutes felt like an eternity as I huddled under the Central Park Bridge, watching the blizzard rage around me. The Niagara River gurgled nearby, its sound oddly comforting in the desolate night. Cars occasionally passed overhead, their headlights casting brief shadows through the storm, reminding me that the world kept moving while my life had just shattered. When Catherine's black Mercedes pulled up at the edge of the underpass, I could barely make out her silhouette through the swirling snow. At 71, my little sister still moved with the same determination that had carried her through life. She stepped out into the storm, her silver hair immediately plastered to her head by the sleet, her expensive coat soaked within seconds. "William," she said simply, kneeling beside me without caring about the ice and snow. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from anger. "I've been driving for an hour to find you." I struggled to my feet, hardly believing she was real. "Catherine, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm telling." She picked up my suitcase without waiting for permission and started walking toward her car. The same look she'd given bullies in our childhood was now fixed on her face. Protective, fierce, and absolutely unforgiving. The warmth hit me like a physical embrace when I slid into the passenger seat. Catherine cranked the heat higher and reached into the back seat, pulling out a thermos. "Coffee," she said, unscrewing the cap. "Still hot." The first sip sent warmth spreading through my chest, and for the first time since David's door slammed behind me, I felt human again. Catherine pulled onto the empty highway, her jaw set in a line I recognized. She was planning something. "William," she said, her voice taking on the tone she used in boardrooms, "what David did tonight, it's not going to stand. You understand that, right?" I didn't know what she meant, but something in her voice told me Catherine had already started calculating. My little sister had grown up to become a force of nature, and now that force was aimed at protecting me. "I don't want to be a burden on you two," I said quietly. Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Burden? You think I've forgotten everything we built together? Everything you sacrificed when we were growing up?" She glanced at me, her eyes reflecting the dashboard light. "William, I've been begging you for 5 years to stop this ridiculous charade. Stop pretending to be poor. Stop testing David's love with fake poverty." The highway stretched ahead of us, leading towards something I couldn't yet imagine. In the rearview mirror, Manhattan disappeared into the storm, taking with it the last remnants of the life I'd tried to build with my son. "David made a mistake tonight," Catherine continued, her voice growing colder with each word. "He thinks you're weak. He thinks you'll just disappear quietly into some nursing home and die forgotten. He has no idea what he's unleashed." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Tomorrow morning we're going to remind David exactly who William Stone really Island Stone Empire doesn't sleep, William. And neither do we." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than despair. Sitting in my sister's car, watching the storm disappear behind us, I felt the first stirring of something dangerous. David wanted to throw away his father. Tomorrow he'd learn he'd just declared war on a billionaire. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Stone Empire headquarters on Wall Street. I hadn't been in this building for months, preferring my charade of simple living. Now, standing in the executive elevator with Catherine, I felt the weight of what we were about to unleash. "Remind me again why we kept David's construction company afloat for 10 years, Catherine said, her voice echoing in the elevator shaft. "Because I wanted to see if he could succeed on his own merit," I replied, though the words tasted bitter now. I wanted to believe my son had integrity. The elevator doors opened to reveal the 52nd floor, our private offices overlooking Manhattan. Catherine walked straight to her desk and pulled out a thick manila folder I'd never seen before. "Victoria Cross will be here in 20 minutes, she announced, opening the folder to reveal dozens of documents, contracts, and financial statements. "I've been preparing for this day longer than you know, William." I stared at the papers spread across her mahogany desk. Bank guarantees, loan approvals, construction permits, city contracts, 1C, all bearing David's company name, all secretly backed by Stone Empire funding. "My God, Catherine, how much?" $12 million over the past decade, she said matter-of-factly. "Every major project David ever won was rigged in his favor. Every bank loan was guaranteed by us. Every city contract came through our connections." The magnitude of David's deception in Max and our own enabling hit me like a physical blow. My son hadn't built anything. We had built it for him, and he'd never known. Victoria Cross arrived precisely on schedule, her briefcase looking like it could survive a nuclear war. At 52, she had the kind of confident presence that made opposing lawyers reconsider their career choices. "William," she said, settling into the leather chair across from my desk, "Catherine filled me in on last night's incident. What your son attempted is unconscionable." She opened her briefcase with surgical precision. "The good news is that we can dismantle his entire operation by close of business today. The bad news for David is that we're going to do exactly that." Over the next hour, Victoria walked us through a strategy that was both elegant and devastating. Every loan guarantee would be revoked. Every city contract would be canceled for irregularities. Every business relationship would be terminated immediately. "This is the nuclear option," Victoria explained, her pen moving across legal documents with practiced efficiency. By tomorrow morning, David Stone will own nothing but debt. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes cold as winter steel. What about criminal exposure? Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation, Victoria rattled off. If he tries to fight this, we'll bury him in litigation for the next decade. I signed document after document, each signature feeling like a nail in David's professional coffin. With every stroke of the pen, I thought about his words from last night. You're nothing but worthless trash. There's one more thing, I said as Victoria packed up her briefcase. I want David to know exactly who destroyed his life. When his world comes crashing down, I want him to understand that his worthless father did this. Victoria smiled grimly. I'll make sure the message is crystal clear. As she left our office, Catherine and I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the bustling street below. Somewhere out there, David was probably having his morning coffee, completely unaware that his entire existence was about to implode. Cut off everything, I said quietly. Every loan, every contract, every favor we've ever done for him. Catherine picked up her phone and began dialing. Consider it done. The war had officially begun. David Stone was enjoying his morning coffee in his corner office when the first call came in. The view from his Manhattan construction headquarters overlooked the Hudson River, a testament to what he believed was his own success and business acumen. Mr. Stone? His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Meridian Development is on line 1. They say it's urgent. David picked up the phone with casual confidence. The Meridian project was his biggest contract, a $40 million residential complex that would secure his company's future for the next 3 years. David, I'm sorry to do this over the phone, came the voice of Robert Meridian, but we're terminating our contract effective immediately. The coffee mug froze halfway to David's lips. What? Robert, we've been planning this for 8 months. Construction starts next week. There are irregularities in your financial backing that have come to light. Our legal team advises us to cut ties immediately. You'll receive formal notification within the hour. The line went dead. David stared at the phone, his mind racing. Irregularities? His company's finances were solid, or so he thought. Before he could process what had happened, the phone rang again, then again, and again. North Point Banking. We're calling all outstanding loans immediately due to covenant violations. City Planning Commission. Your permits for the Brooklyn project have been revoked pending investigation. Hudson Construction Supply. Payment terms are now cash only. Effective today. By noon, David's office looked like a war zone. Papers scattered across his desk, his assistant fielding angry calls from subcontractors, and his business partner Marcus pacing frantically by the window. This doesn't make sense, Marcus said, loosening his tie. Yesterday we were solid. Today it's like someone flipped a switch, and every door in the city slammed shut. David's hands shook as he reviewed the termination notices piling up on his desk. 12 major contracts canceled. 6 bank loans called in. Every city permit under review. It was systematic, coordinated, and absolutely devastating. Someone's doing this to us, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't coincidence. This is warfare. Amanda appeared in the doorway, her face pale. She'd been shopping when the calls started coming to their home phone. David, what's happening? The bank just froze our personal accounts. They're saying there's some kind of investigation? David looked up at his wife, seeing fear in her eyes for the first time since they'd married. I don't know, but someone with serious power wants us destroyed. His phone buzzed with a text from his foreman. All the guys walked off the job sites. Word is out that we can't make payroll. Sorry, boss. The reality hit David like a physical blow. In less than 6 hours, his construction empire had crumbled. Contracts worth $60 million, bank relationships built over a decade, severed. His reputation in the industry, tight destroyed. There has to be someone behind this, he said, standing up and walking to the window. You don't just accidentally lose everything in one morning. Someone with connections, someone with serious money, someone who wants to see me burn. Amanda joined him at the window, both of them staring out at the city that had suddenly turned hostile. Who could hate us this much? Who has that kind of power? David's mind raced through possibilities. Business competitors? Disgruntled subcontractors? City officials he'd crossed? But none of them had the reach to orchestrate something this comprehensive, this devastating. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible thought began to form. The timing, the precision, the absolute ruthlessness of the attack. But no, that was impossible. The old man was worthless trash, remember? Just a burden he'd finally gotten rid of, wasn't he? 3 days after David's world began crumbling, Victoria Cross walked into his office unannounced. Her presence commanded immediate attention: expensive suit, briefcase that looked like it cost more than most people's cars, and the kind of confidence that came from never losing a case that mattered. "Mr. Stone," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation. "I'm Victoria Cross, representing Stone Empire Holdings." David looked up from the pile of termination notices he'd been staring at for hours. His eyes were bloodshot, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "Stone Empire? I've never heard of—" "Of course you haven't," Victoria interrupted, opening her briefcase with surgical precision. "That was rather the point. Stone Empire prefers to operate behind the scenes. Until now," she placed a stack of documents on David's desk. The letterhead was embossed gold, the kind of stationery that screamed serious money. "I'm here to inform you that Stone Empire has acquired all outstanding debts, contracts, and assets associated with David Stone Construction, effective immediately." David's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. You can't just buy someone's company without—" "Actually, we can." Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. "When a company defaults on $12 million in guaranteed loans, the guarantor has certain rights. Stone Empire was the silent guarantor for every major project you've undertaken in the past decade." The words hit David like a sledgehammer. "Guarantor? What guarantor? I never signed anything with Stone Empire." Victoria pulled out another document, this one thick with signatures and legal seals. "Your father did. William Stone has been backing your company since 2014. Every bank loan, every construction bond, every city contract, Empire, all of it, was secured by Stone Empire Capital." David stared at the papers, his mind reeling. "My father? That's ridiculous. My father is just some old man living off Social Security. He doesn't have that kind of money." "Your father," Victoria said, her voice taking on an almost educational tone, "is William Stone, founder and majority owner of Stone Empire Holdings. Current net worth, approximately $500 million. The office went completely silent except for the hum of air conditioning. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Amanda, who had been standing by the window, sank into a chair. That's impossible," David whispered. "He lived in that tiny apartment. He wore the same clothes for years. He asked me for help with groceries." Victoria's expression didn't change. Mr. Stone preferred to live modestly while observing his son's character. "Unfortunately for you, your character assessment came back rather unfavorably." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Security will escort you from the building in 10 minutes. Your personal effects will be mailed to your home address, assuming you still have one after the foreclosure proceedings begin next week." David shot to his feet, desperation replacing shock. "Wait! There has to be some mistake. I can explain what happened the other night. I was under stress. I said things I didn't mean." Mr. Stone was very specific in his instructions. Victoria continued, packing her briefcase. Quote, "I want David to know exactly who destroyed his life. When his world comes crashing down, I want him to understand that his worthless father did this." Unquote. The words, his own words from 3 nights ago, came back to haunt him. Worthless trash. That's what he'd called the man who had been secretly funding his entire existence. "Your father also wanted me to deliver a personal message," Victoria said, pausing at the door. "He says to tell you that some words can never be taken back, and some sons don't deserve forgiveness." As security guards appeared in the doorway, David realized the full magnitude of what he'd done. He hadn't just thrown out a helpless old man in a snowstorm. He'd declared war on a billionaire, and he'd lost before the first shot was fired. The moment David stepped out of his former office building, he pulled out his phone with shaking hands. His father's number, 10, the same number he'd ignored for months, was now the most important contact in his device. The call went straight to voicemail, not the generic carrier message, but a custom recording in his father's voice. "You've reached William Stone. If this is David, don't bother leaving a message." David's stomach dropped. He tried again. Same result. Then again. And again. "Pick up, damn it!" he shouted into the phone, drawing stares from passing pedestrians. "I know you're there. We need to talk." But William Stone, M&A, his billionaire father, who he'd called worthless trash, had made his position crystal clear. The son who'd thrown him into a blizzard was no longer welcome in his life. David tried Catherine's number next. His aunt had always been the peacemaker in the family. Surely she would— "The number you have dialed has been disconnected," came the automated response. Panic rising in his chest, David flagged down a taxi. "Stone Empire headquarters, Wall Street," he told the driver, and step on it. 20 minutes later, he stood in the marble lobby of his father's building, a building he'd walked past hundreds of times without knowing his own family owned it. The security guard, a mountain of a man in an expensive suit, blocked his path to the elevators. "I'm sorry, sir. Mr. William Stone has left explicit instructions that you're not to be admitted to this building." "He's my father!" David shouted, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I have a right to see him." "Not according to this restraining order," the guard replied, producing an official document. "You're to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from Mr. Stone, his residence, and his place of business." David stared at the legal paper in disbelief. His own father had taken out a restraining order against him. The finality of it hit him like a physical blow. By the time he returned to his penthouse, the penthouse he now realized he could never afford on his actual income, Amanda was waiting with packed suitcases by the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "My sister's place in Connecticut," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I can't do this anymore, David," the bank called. "They're foreclosing on the apartment. The cars are being repossessed tomorrow. My credit cards have been canceled. Amanda, please, we can work through this." "My father." "Your father?" She turned on him with fury he'd never seen before. "The man you threw out in a snowstorm? The man you called worthless trash? Why would he help us now?" David reached for her, but she stepped back. "I married David Stone, successful businessman. I didn't sign up for David Stone, broke fool who destroyed his own family." She picked up her suitcases and walked toward the door. "My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce papers." The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty penthouse. The same sound his father had heard 3 nights ago. But now David was on the receiving end. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that had once made him feel like king of the city. Now Manhattan looked different. Every building, every light, every street corner reminded him of opportunities he'd lost, bridges he'd burned, and the father he'd betrayed. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner, Marcus. "Sorry, man, but I can't be associated with your name anymore. Word is out that you're toxic. Nobody in the industry will work with you." David sank onto the leather couch that would be repossessed within days. In less than a week, he'd gone from successful businessman to complete pariah. No company, no wife, no friends, no money, and no family. He was truly, completely alone. And it was entirely his own fault. 1 month after the confrontation in the snowstorm, I sat in Catherine's study overlooking the Hudson River, reading Victoria's weekly report on David's situation. The numbers were stark, clinical, and utterly devastating. Assets liquidated. $3.2 million penthouse, 2 luxury vehicles, business equipment. I read aloud. Outstanding debts, $8.7 million. Current employment status, unemployed and unemployable in the construction industry. Catherine looked up from her laptop where she was reviewing foundation documents. "He's been calling the office 12 times a day. Security says he shows up at the building entrance every morning, hoping you'll change your mind." I set down the report and walked to the window. Somewhere out there in the city, my son was learning what it meant to have nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years pretending to be poor while he lived in luxury, funded by my money. Now our positions were reversed, and it was entirely his own doing. "Any regrets?" Catherine asked gently. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret destroying David's life? Did I regret cutting off all contact? Did I regret refusing to answer his increasingly desperate voicemails? "No," I said finally. "Some words can never be taken back, Catherine. Some actions reveal who a person truly is at their core." I picked up my phone and played David's most recent voicemail, left at 3 a.m. the night before. "Dad, please. I know I messed up. I know I said terrible things. But I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything? I'm living in a studio apartment in Queens. Amanda's gone. Everyone's gone. I have nothing left." Catherine winced at the desperation in his voice, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no paternal instinct to rescue him. Just cold, hard justice. "He called me worthless trash," I said quietly. "He threw me into a blizzard like garbage to be disposed of. He looked me in the eye and told me I was dead to him." I deleted the voicemail without finishing it. Well, now he knows what it feels like. Victoria arrived that afternoon with the final legal documents establishing the William Stone Foundation for Elder Rights. What had started as a weapon to protect myself had evolved into something larger, a way to help other elderly people who faced abuse from their own families. "The foundation is fully funded with $50 million, Victoria reported. We've already received over 200 applications for assistance from seniors facing financial exploitation by family members. Catherine smiled for the first time in weeks. Your father's pain is becoming something meaningful, Victoria, something that will help others avoid the same betrayal. As Victoria left, I remained at the window, watching the sun set over Manhattan. David was out there somewhere, probably in his studio apartment, wondering how his life had collapsed so completely. Part of me, a very small part, felt sorry for him. But then I remembered his face that night. The disgust, the contempt, the absolute certainty that I was nothing but a burden to be discarded. Some people have to lose everything to learn the value of what they had, I said to Catherine. David had a father who loved him unconditionally. A father who would have given him the world if he'd just shown basic respect and decency. Catherine joined me at the window. And now? Now he has nothing, I replied. And that's exactly what he deserves. My phone buzzed with another call from David's number. I declined it without hesitation and blocked the number permanently. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some sons don't deserve the title. David Stone was no longer my responsibility. He was simply a stranger who had made the mistake of crossing William Stone, and I was done pretending to be anyone other than exactly who I was. 6 months after that brutal night in the Manhattan blizzard, I stood before a packed auditorium at Columbia University, delivering the keynote address for their Elder Rights Symposium. The William Stone Foundation had grown beyond anything Catherine and I had imagined, helping over 500 families across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking out at the sea of faces, social workers, lawyers, adult children, and elderly people who had found the courage to speak up about abuse. I want to tell you about the most expensive lesson I ever taught. The audience leaned forward, sensing this wasn't going to be a typical academic presentation. 6 months ago, I was thrown out into a snowstorm by my own son. He called me worthless trash, told me I was dead to him, and slammed the door in my face. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. What my son didn't know was that I'm worth $500 million. The auditorium fell completely silent. I had spent years testing his character by living modestly, pretending to be poor. I wanted to see if he would love and respect his father regardless of wealth. I failed that test spectacularly. I paused, thinking about David's face that night. The contempt, the disgust, the absolute certainty that I was disposable. The lesson I taught my son cost him everything. His business, his marriage, his home, his reputation. He lost $12 million in assets and found himself unemployable in his industry. Some of you might think that's harsh. Some might say I went too far. An elderly woman in the front row nodded knowingly. She understood. But here's what I learned in that blizzard, standing alone with nowhere to go. How someone treats you when they think you have nothing reveals everything about their character. My son showed me exactly who he was when he thought I was powerless. I walked closer to the audience, my voice growing stronger. The foundation we've built from this tragedy has helped hundreds of families. Seniors who were being financially exploited by their children. Elderly people who were emotionally abused by the very people who should have protected them. People who thought they had no voice, no power, no options. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous crescendo. Age doesn't make us invisible. Experience doesn't make us worthless. Gray hair doesn't make us disposable. We are not burdens to be endured. We are treasures to be valued. I thought about all the stories we'd heard through the foundation. Margaret Chen, whose nephew tried to steal her house. Robert Williams, whose daughter cleaned out his bank account. Sarah Martinez, whose son-in-law convinced her to sign over power of attorney, then abandoned her in a nursing home. If you're watching this, and you recognize yourself in my story, if you've been made to feel worthless by your own family, know this: you still have power, you still have options, you still matter. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. As I left the stage, I thought about David one last time. According to Victoria's reports, he was working construction day labor, living in a studio apartment, completely cut off from the life he'd once known. Amanda had remarried. His former friends avoided him. The industry had moved on without him. Sometimes the people who love us most need to learn the hardest lessons. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices. I walked out of that auditorium knowing I'd found my purpose. David had tried to throw away his father. Instead, he'd created an advocate for thousands of people who refused to be thrown away. Some lessons are worth $500 million. Some truths are priceless. And some sons learn too late that father's love isn't unconditional forever. Sometimes the deepest betrayal stories teach us the most profound lessons about resilience and faith. William's journey reminds us that when family turns their back on us, God never does. In our darkest moments, when we feel most abandoned, the Lord works through unexpected angels, like Catherine appearing in that storm, to show us we're never truly alone. These grandpa stories aren't just about age or family conflict. They're about discovering that our worth isn't defined by how others treat us, but by how God sees us and how we choose to respond. When David called his father worthless trash, he forgot that every soul has divine purpose, regardless of age. The Almighty often uses our greatest trials to prepare us for our most meaningful work. Betrayal stories like William's can become victory stories when we trust in God's plan. His foundation didn't just protect seniors, it became a testament to how the Lord can turn our deepest wounds into healing for others. These grandpa stories remind us that experience isn't a burden, it's wisdom waiting to serve. The lesson is clear. When the world discards you, remember that God never does. Age brings not weakness, but the strength of survival, the power of perspective, and the courage to fight for what's right. Betrayal stories teach us that sometimes the people who hurt us most become the catalysts for our greatest purpose. Grandpa stories like William's prove that respect isn't about wealth or status. It's about recognizing the divine spark in every person, especially those who've walked this earth longest and carry God's wisdom in their hearts. If William's story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share this message with someone who needs to remember their worth. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories of triumph over adversity.